All right, let's jump right in, shall we? Welcome to our deep dive, this time into the February 2025 Visa Bulletin.
Yeah.
This thing, it's basically the holy grail for anyone even thinking about immigrating to the U.S.
Right. It tells you who gets in and when, and it changes every month, so keeping up can be tricky.
Exactly. That's why we're here, right?
Yeah.
To break it all down, make sense of the dates, the categories, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
So think of this deep dive as your cheat sheet to navigating the Visa Bulletin maze. It tells us how many visas are actually available, whether you're coming over for family, for work, or even,
Even through the lottery.
that's right, the lottery. But let's be real, this document, it's not exactly light reading.
It can be pretty dense.
So where should we even start?
I think the first thing is understanding those preference categories they keep mentioning.
Different categories, okay.
Yeah, for both family and employment visas. It's how the U.S. decides who gets priority.
So break that down for me, like what does that actually mean in practice?
Sure, so on the family side, it all comes down to who you're related to.
Okay.
Like, are you the spouse of a U.S. citizen? Or maybe the unmarried child of a green card holder?
I see.
Each relationship gets a different preference level. So, for example, the unmarried son or daughter of a U.S. citizen, that's first preference.
Makes sense.
Then you have spouses and children of green card holders, that's second preference, and so on.
Gotcha. So the closer your family ties are, the higher up on the list you go.
Exactly.
And is it the same deal for employment visas?
Same idea, but different criteria.
Right.
Instead of family, it's all about your skills and what kind of work you'll be doing.
Okay.
So at the very top, first preference, you've got folks with extraordinary abilities like world-renowned scientists
Okay.
or executives running multinational companies. Then second preference is for people with advanced degrees, masters, PhDs, that sort of thing.
I see.
They're people with exceptional ability in certain fields.
And then it just keeps going down from there.
You got it. But here's the thing, even within your category, it's not just about what skills you have.
Oh, so there's more to it.
It's also about when you applied.
Okay.
And that's where those infamous priority dates come in.
Oh, yeah, those things.
They can make or break your chances.
So remind me again, how do those work?
It's basically the date your petition was officially filed, and it's like your place in line.
So the earlier your date, the better.
Absolutely. The earlier, the closer you are to actually getting that visa.
Oh, man. So it's a waiting game no matter what.
Yeah, it can be a long one sometimes.
So how does this bulletin actually show us, like, where everyone stands in that line?
It's all about the cutoff dates in those charts, especially the final action dates.
Final action dates, right?
These tell you which priority dates are currently being processed for each category.
Got it. So if my priority date is earlier than the final action date, I'm golden.
You're in good shape.
Yeah.
But there's one more wrinkle: chargeability.
I knew there had to be a catch.
It's usually based on your country of birth, and different countries have different cutoff dates.
Oh, so it's like a double whammy. You need the right category and the right country.
It all depends on visa demand and how many are allocated to each place.
Can we walk through an example just to make sure I'm getting this?
Of course. Let's say you're from the Philippines and you're applying in the F1 category. That's for unmarried sons and daughters of U.S. citizens.
Okay.
In this February bulletin, the final action date for the Philippines in that category is March 8th, 2012.
Okay, so if my petition was filed before March 8, 2012,
Then you're good to go.
then I can move forward. But if it's after, I'm stuck waiting.
Right. You'll have to wait till your date becomes current.
Wow, that's a pretty big difference. I guess it shows just how much these dates can swing depending on where you're from and what category you're in.
Exactly. It's like a moving target sometimes.
Speaking of moving targets, what about employment visas? Any big changes in those this month?
A few, actually.
Okay, like what?
Well, the ED3 category, that's for skilled workers and professionals from India.
Right.
It saw a pretty big jump forward from December 15th, 2012, all the way to December 1st, 2022.
Wow, that's like 10 years.
It's a big leap, for sure. Must be a relief for those folks who've been waiting.
It's a big deal. Any idea what caused that sudden shift? Is it a good sign for the future, you think?
Tough to say for sure. Could be a bunch of things.
Right.
Maybe some policy changes or increased processing power at USCIS, or even just changes in demand from other countries.
So it's a wait-and-see situation, I guess?
Pretty much, yeah. We'll have to see what happens in the coming months.
Interesting. Okay, so we've covered family, we've covered employment, but what about those folks hoping to get in through the diversity visa lottery?
Ah, the lottery.
It seems like that's where luck plays a much bigger role.
Absolutely. It's officially called the Diversity Visa Program, or DV for short.
Okay.
And yeah, it's basically a green card lottery.
Sounds pretty exciting.
Right. It's designed to give a chance to folks from countries that haven't historically sent a lot of immigrants to the U.S.
It was like a level playing field. Anyone can win.
Well, you still have to meet some basic requirements.
Right.
But within that, yeah, it's totally random.
So this month's bulletin, does it show if the diversity visa category is open?
It does. It's open for DV 2025 applicants from all regions.
Wow. So anyone from anywhere can throw their hat in the ring?
Pretty much, but there are a couple of caveats.
Oh, I was wondering about that. We can't have everyone winning, right?
Right, there are limits, both overall A&D per country.
Limits, okay.
So even if you win, you might not get a visa if your country has already hit its quota.
Makes sense. Otherwise, some countries would be way overrepresented.
Exactly. And on top of that, DV entitlement, it's time sensitive.
Oh, like there's an expiration date.
Yeah, for DV 2025 applicants, it's September 30, 2025.
Huh.
After that, even if you won the lottery, you're out of luck.
Wow, so you got to act fast if you get picked.
You got it.
Okay, so luck, limits, and deadlines. Anything else folks need to know about the diversity visa game?
Just that those per-country limits can really change things up.
Right. I guess it's not just about winning. It's about winning at the right time from the right place.
You got it.
Speaking of timing, I noticed some interesting bits about recent legislation and how it's impacting certain visa categories.
Oh yeah, there have been some big changes.
Right. Like that whole thing with the employment fourth preference, certain religious workers category, the SR category.
Right.
That was set to expire, but Congress threw it a lifeline, didn't they?
They did, yeah. Extended it to March 14th, 2025.
So that's good news for those applicants, right?
It is, but there's a catch.
Of course there's a catch. What is it this time?
Well, the deadline is super strict. No SR visas can be issued after midnight on March 13, 2025, and anyone entering the U.S. under this category has to be admitted by that date, too.
Wow, talk about cutting it close.
It's down to the wire.
So if you're in that category, better get a move on. Are there any other legislative updates folks need to know about?
Yeah, there are some changes for special immigrant visas, too. Those are SIVs for certain U.S. government employees who are abroad.
Oh, right, those folk.
The National Defense Authorization Act that was just signed back in December 2023 has some new rules that could impact their applications.
Gotcha. So if you're applying for an SIV, better double check those changes.
Definitely. Always good to be up to date.
Maybe even reach out to the consulate where you filed your application, just to be on the safe side.
Good idea.
When it comes to immigration, you never want to assume anything.
Right. You got to dot your I's and cross your T's.
Exactly. I think these legal updates are a good reminder that the Visa Bulletin, it's not just some static document, it's constantly changing.
Right. It's a living, breathing thing, always evolving.
Yeah, to reflect the latest policies and priorities and whatever Congress decides to do.
You got it. It's all connected.
It really is. And it just makes me appreciate how complex this whole system is.
Yeah, it's a lot to keep track of.
Especially for folks who are trying to navigate it on their own.
Absolutely.
But hey, that's why we do these deep dives, right?
Right, to break it all down.
To try to make sense of it all and hopefully give our listeners some useful information.
Hopefully.
Okay, so we've laid some groundwork. We've talked about those all-important preference categories.
Right.
We've touched on those priority dates, the cutoff dates, and the ever-changing rules of the game.
Yeah, it's a lot.
But there's still so much more to explore in this February 2025 Visa Bulletin.
Tons.
In our next segment, we're going to get even more granular.
Okay.
We'll dive into some specific categories, look at the trends, and what they might mean for the future of immigration to the U.S.
That's the big question, right?
It is. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Back after a short break. All right, welcome back to our deep dive into this February 2025 Visa Bulletin.
Okay, so we've covered the basics, but there were a couple categories that really caught my eye.
Oh, yeah. Which ones?
Well, first off, that EB3 category for skilled workers and professionals.
Right.
We talked about that big jump for applicants from India. But there's also this whole thing with the Nicaraguan and Central American Relief Act, NICARA.
Yeah, NICARA, it's a bit of a throwback.
Right. It was passed back in '97, but it's still affecting visa availability today, even in 2025.
It is, yeah. It's interesting how something from so long ago can still have such a big impact.
So can you remind me what NICARA was all about again?
Sure. It was basically created to give certain folks from Nicaragua and Central America a path to permanent residency in the U.S.
Right.
But the thing is, it also has this kind of ripple effect on the EB3 category, specifically the other workers subcategory.
So it's like a chain reaction.
Kinda, yeah.
Mhm.
NACARA actually sets aside a certain number of visas each year, up to 5,000, just for eligible people under NACARA.
Oh, so it's like reserving a slice of the pie.
Exactly.
Interesting how a law from decades ago is still shaping how visas are allocated today.
Yeah, it shows you how interconnected all these different parts of the immigration system really are.
Absolutely. Okay, another category that caught my attention was AB5, the one for investors.
Ah, the investor visa.
Seems like there's no waiting game there. A lot of countries show a current status, meaning no backlog.
Right, EB5 is designed to attract foreign investment, boost the U.S. economy, that kind of thing.
So if you've got the money, you can basically jump the line.
Well, you still have to meet certain requirements, like investing a significant amount of capital and creating jobs.
Right. It's not just about handing over a check.
Exactly. But if you meet those criteria, yeah, the current status means you can move pretty quickly.
But I did see some exceptions to that current status. Like mainland China has a final action date of July 15, 2016.
Right. That's because of those per-country limits we were talking about earlier.
Ah, right. Those pesky limits again.
Even though there's no overall backlog in EB5, China has so many applicants that they hit their limit, creating a backlog just for them.
So it's like a bottleneck. Even if there's space on the other side, not everyone can fit through at once.
Exactly. And it really highlights how those per-country limits can impact even categories that are otherwise current.
It does. And it also kind of makes you think about the whole question of wealth and immigration.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Is it right that someone can essentially buy their way into the U.S.?
It's a big debate.
Yeah.
Some people argue it's a win-win, brings in money, creates jobs,
Right.
but others worry that it gives an unfair advantage to the wealthy and maybe pushes aside people who are just as deserving but don't have the cash.
Yeah, it's a tough one. No easy answers there.
Nope.
And I think the Visa Bulletin, with all its shifting dates and categories and everything, it really reflects those tensions that exist in U.S. immigration policy.
Absolutely. It's a microcosm of those larger debates happening all the time.
Yeah.
About trying to balance economic needs with humanitarian concerns and how to create a system that's both fair and efficient.
Right, because at the end of the day, it's not just about numbers and categories, it's about people's lives.
It is, yeah. Behind every visa application, there's a story, a dream, a whole future hanging in the balance.
Absolutely. And this Visa Bulletin, it might seem like a dry, technical document at first glance.
Yeah.
But when you really dig into it,
Yeah.
you start to see all those aspirations and the complexities of the policies that shape them.
For sure. And that's why it's so important to keep analyzing these details, looking at the trends, and having these conversations.
Right, because understanding the Visa Bulletin is about more than just knowing the rules.
It's about understanding the human impact of those rules.
Exactly. Okay, so we've explored some specific categories. We've talked about those per country limits, the impact of past legislation.
Right.
We've even touched on some of the ethical dilemmas involved.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about.
But now, I want to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. What does this February 2025 Visa Bulletin tell us about the future of U.S. immigration?
The big question.
That's where we're headed next. Stay with us. Okay, so we're back for the final stretch of our deep dive into the February 2025 Visa Bulletin.
Yeah, time to tie it all together.
We've gone through a lot, those preference categories, priority dates, country limits, the whole shebang.
It's a lot to process for sure.
But now I want to step back and look at the big picture.
Okay.
What does this bulletin actually tell us about the direction U.S. immigration is headed in?
Yeah, what's the overall takeaway here?
What are you seeing in terms of trends? What should our listeners be paying attention to?
Well, one thing that really jumps out is the backlog issue.
Backlogs, yeah.
Especially in those employment-based categories, it just keeps getting worse.
Like, how bad are we
I
talking?
mean, for certain categories like EB2 and EB3 for professionals from India and China,
Right.
some of those priority dates are going back over a decade.
A decade?
Yeah, it's crazy. These folks are waiting years and years just for a chance to even apply for a green card.
So what's causing these backlogs to get so out of control?
I think it's a few things. One is just the sheer volume of applications.
Right, the demand is huge.
Especially from countries with large populations and booming economies, a lot of people are looking to come to the U.S.
And then on top of that, we've got those per-country limits.
Right, those don't help.
They're supposed to ensure diversity, but they also create bottlenecks.
Exactly. It's like trying to pour a gallon of water through a straw.
So it's a classic supply and demand problem. Too many qualified applicants, not enough visas to go around.
Pretty much, yeah. But there's also the issue of processing times within USCIS.
Right. USCIS, the agency that handles all these applications.
Yeah, they often struggle with resource constraints, bureaucratic hurdles, the drill.
So it's a perfect storm, high demand, limited supply, and then slow processing on top of it all.
It's a tough situation, and it's not getting any easier.
So what are the consequences of all this? I mean, it's got to be more than just an economic impact, right?
Oh, yeah. For the individuals stuck in this backlog, it's incredibly stressful.
I can only imagine.
They're facing missed opportunities, their skills might become outdated, and they might be separated from family for years on end.
It's heartbreaking, honestly.
It is, yeah. And then from a broader perspective, it hurts U.S. competitiveness.
How so?
Companies struggle to recruit and retain top talent because they can't get these folks visas.
Right. If you're a company and you can't hire the best people, you're going to fall behind.
Exactly. And innovation suffers, the economy misses out. It's a lose-lose situation for everyone involved.
So what can be done? Is there any way to fix this broken system?
It's a tough question. There's no easy answer.
Yeah.
But I think it requires a multi-pronged approach.
Okay, so what are some of those prongs?
Well, first off, we need to reform the legal immigration system itself.
Like how?
Increase visa numbers in those high-demand categories. If the demand is there, the supply needs to adjust.
Makes sense, but that's probably going to be a tough sell politically.
It will be, yeah. But it's something we need to push for.
Okay, what else?
We got to streamline processing times within USCIS.
Right, make things more efficient.
Invest in technology, reduce bureaucracy, make sure they have enough staff to handle the workload, all that stuff.
Sounds good in theory, but government bureaucracy,
I know, it's an uphill battle, but it's worth fighting for.
Absolutely. Anything else we can do?
I think we also need to remember the human element.
Right, the people behind the numbers.
USCIS needs to communicate clearly with applicants, provide support services, and set reasonable processing timelines.
So it's not just about making the system faster, it's also about making it more humane.
Exactly. People need to feel like they're being treated fairly, not just like another number in a backlog.
I think that's a great point to end on.
Yeah.
The Visa Bulletin, it's a complex document. It's full of numbers and dates and categories.
And legalese.
But ultimately, it's a reflection of human aspirations, of people's dreams to build a better life for themselves and their families.
It is, yeah. And those stories are what make this whole thing so important.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to thank you for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
And I hope our listeners have gained a better understanding of the Visa Bulletin and the complex world of U.S. immigration.
Me too.
It's a topic that's often shrouded in confusion and misinformation, so it's important to stay informed and keep asking questions.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to something as important as immigration.
Well said. Thanks again for your insights.
Anytime.
And to our listeners, until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep those questions